Hello children, I hope you all are doing great. The story that we would read today is centered around a child. For a child, his parents are his most favorite possession. Each and every materialistic thing becomes absolutely worthless in comparison to his parents. Such an attachment, such a connection, bond, we get to witness in the story The Lost Child, written by Mulkraj Anand. Now before we go to the explanation of the chapter, let us know Mulkraj Anand a little better. Mulkraj Anand, one of the most highly regarded Indian novelists, was born in Peshawar in 1905. He was educated at the universities of Lahore, London and Cambridge and lived in England for many years, finally settling in a village in Western India after the war. His main concern has always been for the creatures in the lower depths of Indian society who once were men and women, the rejected who had no way to articulate their anguish against the oppressors. His novels of humanism have been translated into several world languages. The fiction factions include Untouchable, Coolie, Two Leaves and a Bud, The Village, Across the Black Waters, The Sword and the Sickle, and the much acclaimed Private Life of an Indian Prince. His autobiographical novels like Seven Summers, Morning Face won the National Academy Award. He was also a recipient of the civilian honor of the Padma Bhushan. He died on 28 September 2004. Now before we move on to the line-by-line explanation of the chapter, let me just give you a brief synopsis of what the chapter is all about. A spring fair was held in a village and a small boy visits the fair with his parents. There he gets excited seeing the toys, sweetmeat stall, garlands, balloons and the snake charmer. He even wanted to take a ride of the merry-go-round. But very soon he gets lost in the fair. He runs here and there to find his parents. He starts crying, and then a man, finding the child in that miserable condition, tries to console him by asking if he wanted a horse ride or a balloon. But the lost child said he wanted his parents only. The man took the child to the flower cellar and sweetmeat stall, but the child repeated that he only wanted his mother and father. So now let us start with the line-by-line explanation of the chapter. The Lost Child. It was the festival of spring. So, that means a fair was held in the spring season. From the wintry shades of narrow lanes and alleys emerged a gaily clad humanity. So, people were coming from streets and passages and they were very happy. Humanity means mankind. So, the people who were going to the spring fair were very happy. Some walked, some rode on horses, others sat being carried in bamboos and bullock carts. So some of the people were riding on horses, some were riding on bullock carts, some were being carried in bamboos. So people were all going towards the spring fair. One little boy ran between his father's leg, brimming over with life and laughter. And one boy, he went to the fair with his parents, and he was full of life and laughter. He was full of energy. "Come, child, come," called his parents as he lagged behind, fascinated by the toys in the shop that lined the way. So, we find the child's parents calling out to him, who was lagging behind, who remained behind them, being attracted or being charmed by the toys in the shops. That means the toys that were displayed in the shop. He hurried towards his parents, his feet obedient to their call, his eyes still lingering on the receding toys. So, as soon as he hears his parents calling out to him, he moves towards them quickly. Okay? And his feet are compliant to their call. But his eyes are still on the toys that he saw in the shop. As he came to where they had stopped to wait for him, he could not suppress the desire of his heart, even though he well knew the old cold stare of refusal in their eyes. So, although he listened to their order, he came back, but still he couldn't control his desire to get those toys. Even though he knew that, he could see the cold stare, the cold gaze of refusal, of rejection in his parents' eyes. "I want the toy," he pleaded. So, like we know that he couldn't suppress, he couldn't control his desire, he demanded that toy from his parents. That is, the toy that he saw in the toy shop. He requested his parents to buy him one of those toys. His father looked at him red-eyed in his familiar tyrant's way. So, his father looked at him red-eyed, that means full of anger, in his familiar tyrant way. That means this look or this gaze of his father was known to the child. He always stared at him in this cruel or strict way. Tyrant's way, that means a cruel and a strict stare. His mother, melted by the free spirit of the day, was tender, and giving him her finger to hold, said, "Look, child, what is before you?" So, although we find his father, getting angry at him, but his mother was a loving lady. Okay, she was loving, and she wanted to divert his mind. So she told him to look forward. She told him to look what is before him. It was a flowering mustard field. So she made him see a blooming mustard field. Pale like melting gold as it swept across miles and miles of even land. And it looked pale yellow, that means dim yellow like melting gold, and it extended across miles and miles of plain ground. A group of dragonflies were bustling about on their gaudy purple wings, intercepting the flight of a lone black bee or butterfly in search of sweetness from the flowers. So, then they saw a group of dragonflies. Dragonflies, it's a kind of an insect. They were moving busily about on their gaudy purple wings, gaudy, extravagantly bright purple color wings. And what was these group of dragonflies doing? They were obstructing, intercepting means obstructing the flight of a lone black bee or a butterfly who was in search of sweetness from the flowers, that means nectar from the flowers. The child followed them in the air with his gaze till one of them would still its wings and rest, and he would try to catch it. The child got so fascinated by seeing the dragonflies, the host of dragonflies flying. He just wanted to catch any one of them when it's sitting on any flower. But it would go fluttering, flapping up into the air when he had almost caught it in his hands. But every time he tried to catch it, or he was about to catch it, it would fly. Then his mother gave a cautionary call. Come, child, come. Come onto the footpath. So when his mother finds him, moving towards the field, wanting to catch the dragonflies, she calls out to him that come and walk on the footpath. He ran towards his parents gaily and walked abreast of them for a while, being, however, soon left behind, attracted by the little insects and worms along the footpath that were teeming out from their hiding places to enjoy the sunshine. So, after he heard his mother calling out to him, he very gaily, joyfully, he started walking side by side of his parents. But very soon, he again was lagging behind. He again lagged behind. Why? This time, he got attracted by the little insects and worms that were along the footpath, and they were crawling out from their hiding places to enjoy the sunshine. So this time he got attracted, or he got charmed by seeing the little insects and worms which were there on the footpath, or which were there along the footpath. Come, child, come. So this is the third time they called him. His parents called from the shade of a grove where they had seated themselves on the edge of a wall, on the edge of a well. He ran towards them. So his parents took shelter, under the shade of a group of trees. Grove means a group of trees. And there they were, they were taking rest on the side of a well. And when he when he heard his parents calling out to him, he ran towards them. A shower of young flowers fell upon the child as he entered the grove, and forgetting his parents, he began to gather the raining petals in his hand. So as soon as he reached that place, there was a shower of young flowers upon him. That means shower means rain. And he started collecting those flowers. He forgot everything about his parents and he started collecting those flowers in his hands. But lo, he heard the cooing of doves and ran towards his parents shouting, "The dove, the dove!" The raining petals dropped from his forgotten hands. And as soon as he heard the cooing of doves, he forgot about the flowers. He dropped the flowers from his hand and he wanted to tell his parents about the dove. So he started shouting, "The dove, the dove!" And he dropped the petals, the flowers that he was collecting in his hands. "Come, child, come," they called to the child, who had now gone running in wild capers round the banyan tree. And gathering him up, they took the narrow winding footpath which led to the fair through the mustard fields. So, this time when they called the child was dancing, he was hopping round the banyan tree, and they caught hold of him and they took the narrow and winding footpath. Winding footpath means serpentine footpath, or going in circles. Footpath which were going in circles. And this footpath led to the fair. That means it went towards the fair. And they had to cross the mustard field to reach the fair. As they neared the village, the child could see many other footpaths full of thorns converging to the whirlpool of the fair, and felt at once repelled and fascinated by the confusion of the world he was entering. So as he approached the village, the child could see many other footpaths full of crowds. Throngs means crowds, meeting at a point to a circle of the fair. And he at once felt drove away and fascinated by the confusion of the world that he was entering, by the confusion of the fair that he was entering. A sweetmeat seller hawked gulab jamun, rasgulla, barfi, jalebi at the corner of the entrance, and a crowd pressed round his counter at the foot of an architecture of many colored sweets decorated with leaves of silver and gold. So, as soon as he entered the fair, the first thing that the child noticed was a sweetmeat seller. What is a sweetmeat? It's a piece of sweet tasting food. And he saw a sweetmeat seller or a hawker calling out or shouting at the top of his voice, "Gulab jamun, rasgulla, barfi, jalebi." And what was the crowd doing? The crowd forced around his shop at the foot of an architecture of many colored sweets. That means sweets arranged properly and which were decorated with leaves of silver and gold. The child stared open-eyed and his mouth watered for the barfi that was his favorite sweet. So, as soon as the child saw the barfis which were displayed by the sweetmeat seller, his mouth watered and he wanted the barfi. He wanted to eat the barfi because it was his favorite sweet. I want that barfi, he slowly murmured. That means he demanded for the barfi, but he spoke in a very low voice. But he half knew as he begged that his plea would not be heeded because his parents would say he was greedy. So the child very well knew that his request, that is his plea, would not be cared because his parents would say that he was being greedy. So without waiting for an answer, he moved on. That means he moved forward with his parents. A flower seller hopped. So the second thing that he noticed was a flower seller. And what was he selling? A garland of gulmohar. A garland of gulmohar. The child seemed irresistibly drawn. And this time again, the child could not control himself. He went towards the basket where the flowers lay heaped, heaped means piled, and half murmured, I want that garland. So he rushed towards that flower seller, and again he murmured, he spoke in a very low voice, that I want that garland. But he well knew his parents would refuse to buy him those flowers because they would say that they were cheap. So without waiting for an answer, he moved on. This time also, he knew that his parents won't buy him those flowers. Why? Because they would say that they were cheap, that means they were unpleasant. And so without waiting for their answer, he moved on with his parents. That means he moved forward. Now, the third thing that he noticed was a man stood holding a pole with yellow, red, green and purple balloons flying from it. So this time he sees a balloon seller. The child was simply carried away by the rainbow glory of their silken colors, and he was filled with an overwhelming desire to possess them all. So this time he saw a balloon seller, and he was simply carried away. He was simply fascinated by the varied color of balloons and their silk textured colors. And he was filled with overwhelming desire to possess, that means to buy or to own them all. That means he wanted to buy all the balloons. But he well knew his parents would never buy him the balloons because they would say he was too old to play with such toys. So he walked on further. So this time also he knew that he won't be getting the balloons if he demanded it from his parents, because his parents think him to be too old to play with balloons. So he didn't waste much time there. He started walking further. A snake charmer stood playing a flute to a snake which coiled itself in a basket. its head raised in a graceful bend like the neck of a swan, while the music stole into his invisible ears like the gentle rippling of an invisible waterfall. So the next person that he notices in the in the fair is a snake charmer. That means a person playing tricks with snake. So he notices a snake charmer and who's playing a musical pipe, that is a flute, to which a snake who is coiled, that means who's wounded, who has kept himself wounded in a basket, it's raising its head now gracefully, beautifully, like a swan, while the music that he's playing with his flute steals into its invisible ears, that means forbidden ears, like the gentle rippling of an invisible waterfall, like a gentle falling of water from an invisible waterfall. The child went towards the snake charmer, but knowing his parents had forbidden him to hear such coarse music as the snake charmer played, he proceeded further. So, he suddenly remembered, he went towards the snake charmer, but he suddenly remembered that his parents had prohibited him from hearing such harsh music. So, he proceeded further. That means he moved further. He went forward. There was a roundabout in full swing. Men, women and children carried away in a whirling motion, shrieked and cried with dizzy laughter. So next thing that he saw in the fair was a roundabout, that means a merry-go-round, and it was in full swing, that means it was in the act of moving, and the men and the women and the children who were sitting or who were riding the merry-go-round was shrieking, they were crying with confused laughter, with dizzy laughter. The child watched them intently, and then he made a bold request. I want to go on a roundabout, please, father, mother. The child watched the people who were in the merry-go-round keenly, intently, and then he made a bold request to his parents. And what did he say? He said that he also wanted to ride the merry-go-round or the roundabout. There was no reply. He turned to look at his parents. They were not there ahead of him. He turned to look on either side. They were not there. He looked behind. There was no sign of them. So, when he asked his parents that he wanted to ride in that merry-go-round or the roundabout, he didn't get any reply from them. He turned back. He couldn't see his parents. He looked in front. He couldn't see his parents. So, he was lost. A full, deep cry rose within his dry throat, and with a sudden jerk of his body, he ran from where he stood, crying in real fear, "Mother, father." So, he started crying, he started running here and there in search of his parents. Tears rolled down from his eyes, hot and fierce. His flushed face was convulsed with fear. He looked terrible. His face turned red because of fear. Panic-stricken, he ran to one side first, then to another, hither and thither in all directions, knowing not where to go. He was searching for his parents here and there. He searched for them everywhere. Mother, father, he wailed. His yellow turban came untied and his clothes became muddy. He cried. His yellow turban, that means his yellow head dress that he was wearing, became unfastened, and his clothes became muddy. Having run to and fro in a rage of running for a while, he stood defeated. So, after realizing that he was lost, he stood defeated. He felt like a failure because he couldn't find his parents. He don't know what to do now. His cries suppressed into sobs, so his loud cries subsided into silent sobbing. At little distances on the green grass, he could see through his filmy eyes men and women talking. He tried to look intently among the patches of bright yellow clothes, but there was no sign of his father and mother among these people, who seemed to laugh and talk just for the sake of laughing and talking. So, at a distance from where he was standing, he could see some people talking, some men and women talking. He tried to look carefully among those patches of bright yellow clothes that those people were wearing, but he could see no sign of his father and mother among those people. He ran quickly again, this time to a shrine to which people seemed to be crowding. This time he ran towards a temple where the people were crowding. Every little inch of space here was congested with men, but he ran through people's leg, his little sob lingering, mother, father, near the entrance to the people. However, the crowd became very thick. Men jostled each other, heavy men with flashing murderous eyes and hefty shoulders. So, this time we see that he goes to search for his parents in a temple, okay, where people seemed to be crowding. And every inch of that temple was overcrowded with men and women. And he tried to move his way through the people's leg, and he kept on sobbing, he kept on crying, mother and father. He tried to push those, thick and heavy men with shining, murderous eyes, that means killing eyes, and with broad shoulders. The poor child struggled to thrust away between their feet, but knocked to and fro by their brutal movements, he might have been trampled underfoot, had he not shrieked at the highest pitch of his voice, "Father, mother." So, the poor child, the lost child, he tried hard to push his way between their feet, but he was driven against by the brutal movements of those people. If he wouldn't have shrieked at the highest pitch of his voice, then he would have been surely trampled. He would have been pressed or trodden under their foot. A man in the surging crowd heard his cry, and stooping with great difficulty lifted him up in his arms. A man who was standing in the crowd, he heard his cry. He heard the cry of this child, and he leaned forward with great difficulty because the place was crowded. So it was difficult for him to lean forward. And he lifted the child in his arms. "How did you get here, child? Whose baby are you?" the man asked as he steered clear of the mass. So he kept on interrogating the child that how did he get here? Who are his parents? So he kept on interrogating the child. And he kept on moving his way through the crowd. The child wept more bitterly than ever now and only cried, "I want my mother, I want my father." But the child kept on saying that he wanted his mother, he wanted his father. He kept on repeating the same line. The man tried to soothe him by taking him to the roundabout. So the man who gave him his helping hand, he wanted to pacify or make him quiet by diverting his mind towards the roundabout. The child who once wanted to ride the roundabout, when asked by the man that, "Will you have a ride on the horse?" he gently asked as he approached the ring. The child's throat tore into a thousand shrill sobs, and he only shouted, "I want my mother, I want my father." So we see the child who once wanted to take the ride of the roundabout is now denying it. He's saying that he just wants his mother and his father. He starts crying at the top of his voice, and he rejects the man's proposal. The man headed towards the place where the snake charmer still played on the flute to a swaying cobra. "Listen to that nice music, child," he pleaded. But the child shuts his ears with his fingers and shouted his double-pitched strain, "I want my mother, I want my father." So this time, next, he takes him towards the snake charmer, and he tells him to listen to the nice music that the snake charmer was playing with the help of his flute. But the child simply shuts his ears and he says, "No, I want my father, I want my mother." The man took him near the balloons, thinking the bright colors of the balloons would distract the child's attention and quieten him. "Would you like a rainbow-colored balloon?" he persuasively asked. The child turned his eyes from the flying balloons and just sobbed, "I want my mother, I want my father." So, next, the man took him towards the balloon cellar, and he wanted to deviate his mind. So, he asked him whether he wanted to buy the rainbow-colored balloons. He alluringly asked him, but the child, he turned his eyes from the balloons and he just cried and said, "I want my mother, I want my father." The man, still trying to make the child happy, bore him to the gate where the flower seller sat. "Look, can you smell those nice flowers, child? Would you like a garland to put around your neck? So this time, he takes him towards the garland seller, that means the flower seller shop. He tells the child whether he wants to, buy a garland. But the child turned his nose away from the basket and reiterated his sob. I want my mother, I want my father. So the child, he turned his nose away from the basket of flowers that he wanted to buy, and he reiterated means emphasized, that he only wanted his mother and his father, or he only wants his mother and his father and nothing else. Thinking to humor his disconsolate charge by a gift of sweets, the man took him to the counter of the sweet shop. What sweets would you like, child? He asked. The child turned his face from the sweet shop and only sobbed, I want my mother, I want my father. So the last thing that he does is he takes the child to the sweetmeat stall and he asks the child which sweet he wants to eat. And the child, he turns his face away from the shop and he sobbed and said that he just wants his father and his mother. So we see that the things like the garland, the sweets, the balloons, the snake charmer, everything which the child wanted when he was with his parents, he didn't want these things when he got lost. It all became meaningless for him. He just wanted one thing then, that is his parents. He desperately wanted his parents back. So with this, we complete the chapter. Now let us learn some difficult words from the text. Lingering means remaining behind. Abreast means side by side, that is walking side by side. Wild creepers means wild playful movements. Throngs means crowds. Hawked means cried or shouted. Repelled means drove away. Flushed means red in excitement. Rage means anger. Panic-stricken means full of panic. Shrin means temple. Hefty means strong or broad. Reiterated means emphasized. Disconsolate means very unhappy or unable to be comforted. So, let us learn the theme of the story now. The story portrays the pious relationship between parent and children. Parents are like a banyan tree under whose shade we survive. The joy, happiness and love of the children is ensured by the protecting parents. But if children lose their parents, a dark world falls over them. Just like the little boy who desired to buy everything he saw in the fair, although he knew that he won't get them. But when he loses his parents in the fair, his desire for anything is instantly killed. He finds his world shattered without his parents. With this, we complete the chapter. Thank you for watching this video.